May knelt by the creek, the water biting at her skin, even through the thick denim of her patched trousers. Crimson feathered out into the clear flow, a stark contrast to the smooth gray stones lining the bed. The dawn, a promise of warmth, felt a lifetime away. It only highlighted the raw, angry red blooming on her shoulder. She'd seen enough blood in her young life to know the difference between a scratch and something deeper. This was deeper. Deeper than the shame that burned in her gut. Deeper than the fear that clawed at her throat, making it hard to swallow. Her fingers, nimble usually with needle and thread, fumbled with the strip of linen torn from her undershirt. Bandaging herself one-handed was a dance of pain and frustration. Each tug on the makeshift bandage sent a fresh wave of agony radiating down her arm. She hissed, drawing a sharp breath. Stupid. So damn stupid. She'd been too confident, too eager to reach the pass before nightfall. Now she was here, bleeding like a stuck pig in the middle of nowhere. The pines surrounding the creek stood sentinel, their dark green needles whispering secrets to the wind. Secrets May didn't want to hear. Secrets about riders, about the glint of steel under a harsh sun, about the relentless pursuit that had driven her this far west. She pressed harder on the bandage, her face contorting. It wasn't just the pain. It was the memory. The memory of the man's face, twisted with hate, as he raised the rifle. The memory of the explosion that had ripped through the quiet of the evening, sending splinters of wood and shards of glass flying. The memory of her aunt May forced the image down, clamping down on the rising tide of grief. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. Not when they were still hunting her. She tied off the bandage, the knot clumsy and uneven. It would have to do. She needed to move, to put more distance between herself and the town she'd left burning in her wake. She'd learned early that survival in this land meant being invisible, blending in, becoming a ghost. But ghosts didn't bleed. Ghosts didn't leave trails. And she, May, was leaving a trail a blind man could follow. She scooped up handfuls of the frigid creek water, scrubbing at the bloodstains on her trousers. It was a futile effort. The denim was stained, a permanent reminder of her failure. She glanced at the sky, says. The sun was climbing higher, burning away the last vestiges of dawn. Time was slipping away. With a groan, she pushed herself to her feet, her shoulders screaming in protest. She leaned heavily on a gnarled branch she'd found by the creek, using it as a makeshift crutch. Every step was a victory, a testament to her stubborn refusal to give up. She had to reach the mountains. She had to find shelter. And she had to figure out how to outsmart the men who were determined to see her dead. She looked back at the creek, at the crimson stain slowly dissipating in the rushing water. A stain she could never truly erase. A stain that would forever mark her journey west. She turned her face toward the rising sun, a flicker of defiance in her gaze. They wanted a ghost? She'd give them a ghost they'd never forget, a ghost who would haunt their dreams and remind them of the price of their cruelty. She limped away from the creek, into the shadows of the pines, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind and the fading memory of a crimson stain. The west held its breath, waiting to see what this wounded girl would become, waiting to see if she would survive. The pines offered scant comfort as May pushed deeper into their embrace, each step of painful negotiation with her throbbing shoulder. The sun, now fully risen, cast long skeletal shadows that danced around her, mocking her weakness. She pressed on, driven by a will that seemed stronger than her failing body. 4 weeks. It had been just 4 weeks since life had been manageable. 4 weeks and she was simply May, the seamstress of Willow Creek. The memory felt like a lifetime ago, a faded photograph from a happier existence. Willow Creek, Nevada. Even its name held a promise of solace that the town itself rarely delivered. It was a raw, dusty place, carved out of the unforgiving landscape by the relentless pursuit of silver. The air, thick with the scent of sagebrush and the metallic tang of the mines, hummed with a restless energy. Men came and went, chasing fortunes and fleeting dreams. And in the midst of it all, May had found a small, quiet corner for herself. Her shop, nestled between the saloon and the blacksmith, was a haven of calm. The rhythmic whir of her sewing machine, the soft rustle of fabrics, and the delicate scent of lavender sachets offered a momentary respite from the harsh realities of frontier life. She remembered the feel of the worn wooden floor beneath her feet, the familiar weight of the needle in her hand, the way the sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the colorful threads that lined the walls. It was a simple life, but it was hers. The townsfolk, rough and weathered as the landscape itself, had accepted her with a grudging respect. They admired her skill, her keen competence. Miners with torn trousers, ranchers with ripped saddles, even the occasional dance hall girl with a sequined gown in need of repair. They all came to May. She mended their clothes, but more than that, she mended a little piece of their lives. She listened to their stories, their hopes, their fears, offering a silent, knowing nod. She didn't judge, she didn't prescribe, she simply sewed. She was saving too. Every spare coin, tucked away in a tin box beneath her bed, was a promise to her brother Lin, still waiting in China. He dreamed of joining her, of escaping the poverty and hardship that had plagued their family for generations. May dreamed of it too, of seeing his face again, of sharing a meal, of simply being together. She saw his face now, superimposed on the harsh reality of the landscape. His eager smile, his bright, intelligent eyes. The memory fueled her, gave her strength to take another step, and then another. She remembered Mrs. Olson, the baker's wife, commissioning a new dress for the upcoming town social. A vibrant blue, the color of the summer sky. May had spent hours meticulously stitching the delicate lace trim, her fingers aching, but her heart light with purpose. She remembered old Mr. Hemlock, the grizzled prospector, bringing in a tattered map, its edges frayed and stained with sweat. He needed it reinforced, he said, so he could finally find the mother lode. May had carefully patched the brittle paper, adding a few extra stitches for good measure. She hoped he found his fortune. She remembered Sheriff Brody, a man of few words but unwavering integrity, stopping by for a cup of tea and a quiet conversation. He'd always made her feel safe, protected. But the safety was an illusion, a fragile bubble that burst with the crack of a rifle shot. The memory slammed into her, sharper and more brutal than any physical pain. The smell of gunpowder, the screams, the chaos. The image of her shop, engulfed in flames, consuming everything she had worked for, everything she had hoped for. It had started with whispers. Whispers about the railroad barons, about their insatiable hunger for land, about their ruthless tactics. Whispers about the Chinese Exclusion Act, about the growing resentment towards the Chinese immigrants who had come to the West seeking a better life. Then the whispers turned into threats. Crude signs painted with hateful slogans appearing on her doorstep. Glances filled with suspicion and animosity. The feeling of being watched, of being unwelcome. She had tried to ignore it, to focus on her work, to believe that it would all blow over. But it didn't. It culminated in the arrival of Jedediah Stone, a self-proclaimed leader of the American Reclamation Society. A man with eyes as cold and hard as granite, and a voice that dripped with venom. He demanded that she leave Willow Creek, that she take her foreign ways and go back where she came from. She refused. This was her home. She had earned her place here. She wouldn't be bullied. That night, the fire started. She saw it all in her mind's eye. The mob, fueled by whiskey and hate, surrounding her shop. The torches, casting flickering shadows on their faces. The shouts, the curses, the threats. Her aunt, Aylin, had tried to shield her, to protect her. Aylin, who had raised her since she was a child, who had taught her everything she knew. And then, the shot. May stumbled, catching herself on a low-hanging branch. The pain in her shoulder flared, momentarily eclipsing the memory. But it was always there, lurking beneath the surface, waiting to resurface. She had to keep moving. She had to survive. Not just for herself, but for Aylin. To avenge her death. To make sure that Jedediah Stone and his kind paid for what they had done. She would find a way. She would become strong. She would become the ghost they feared. She glanced back at the sky. The sun was higher now, beating down on her with relentless intensity. The mountains seemed impossibly far away, but she would reach them. She had to. Her life depended on it. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. The whispers of Willow Creek echoed in her ears, a constant reminder of what she had lost. But they also fueled her determination. She would not be silenced. She would not be erased. She was May, and she would survive. The memory of the fire, the screams, and Aylin's lifeless eyes were a constant companion. A shadowy beast that nipped at May's heels with every step. She focused on the immediate. The sting of sweat in her eyes, the ache in her lungs, the rough bark digging into her palm as she used the branch for support. She remembered the blue dress. Mrs. Olson had beamed, her face crinkling with genuine delight, as she admired the finished garment. "You have a gift, May," she'd said, her voice warm. A true gift. A gift that Jedediah Stone had tried to snuff out. A gift he would pay for. She stumbled upon a deer trail, a narrow ribbon winding its way through the dense undergrowth. It offered easier passage, a brief respite from the relentless climb. She followed it, her senses on high alert. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her system. She hadn't slept properly in days. The few hours she managed to steal were fitful, plagued by nightmares. She saw Stone's face, contorted with rage, his eyes burning with a fanatical hatred. She heard Aylin's voice, soft and comforting, urging her to be strong. Aylin, the woman who had taken her in when her parents died, who had taught her everything she knew about sewing, about survival. Aylin, who had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. The debt. It wasn't Aylin's, nor May's. It belonged to a ghost, a phantom husband May barely knew. A transaction in name only, designed to bring her to this land. A promise to a dying man, in exchange for passage to America. Aylin had shielded her from it, from the truth of it, as much as she could. The trail opened into a small clearing. A sun-drenched haven amidst the oppressive forest. A cluster of wildflowers, vibrant splashes of color against the green, swayed gently in the breeze. May paused, drawn to their beauty. A fleeting moment of peace, a reminder that even in the midst of darkness, beauty could still be found. She sank to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion. She needed to rest, to gather her strength, but she couldn't afford to linger. Stone wouldn't stop. He would hunt her down, driven by his twisted sense of justice, his unwavering belief in his own righteousness. She closed her eyes, picturing his mercy, the cruel set of his mouth, the cold calculating glint in his eyes. He was a dangerous man, a man capable of anything. She remembered the day he'd come to her shop, a week before the fire. He hadn't come for mending. He'd brought 2 men with him, faces hard and unreadable. The air in the small shop had grown thick with tension. He'd stood there, his boots scuffing against the wooden floor, his gaze sweeping over the bolts of fabric, the spools of thread, the neatly arranged tools of her trade. He'd spoken slowly, deliberately, his voice a low growl. "Heard you're doing right well for yourself, May," he'd said, "making a good living off honest folk." May had remained silent, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She knew what was coming. She'd seen the looks, heard the whispers. "Your husband. He owed some debts," Stone continued, his eyes narrowing. "Gambling debts. Considerable ones." Her husband. A name she barely remembered. A face she couldn't quite conjure. A man who had died before she even arrived in Willow Creek. "Those debts, they fall to you now," Stone said, his voice hardening. "It's only right." May had looked him straight in the eye, her voice surprisingly steady. "I know nothing of these debts," she'd said. "I am not responsible for them." Stone had chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's not how things work here, little lady," he'd said. "Debts must be paid, one way or another." He'd named a sum, a staggering amount that represented everything she had earned, everything she had saved for Lynn. An impossible sum. "I don't have that kind of money," she'd said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. "Then you'll find a way to get it," Stone had replied, his eyes glinting with menace. "Or you'll face the consequences." He'd turned to leave, his men flanking him like silent sentinels. As he reached the doorway, he paused, looking back at her with a chilling smile. "Consider this a friendly warning, May," he'd said, "but don't mistake my kindness for weakness." She hadn't mistaken it. She knew what he was capable of. And she knew that he wouldn't hesitate to use violence to get what he wanted. Now, alone in the wilderness, wounded and hunted, she knew she had to be smarter, tougher than she ever imagined. She had to find a way to turn the tables on Stone. She opened her eyes, her gaze hardening. The wildflowers seemed to mock her vulnerability. She pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. She would not be intimidated. She would not be broken. She would find a way to repay Stone's cruelty, not with money, but with justice. She adjusted her grip on the branch, her gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. They were still far away, but they represented hope, a chance at survival. She took a deep breath and started walking again. Her steps slow, but determined. The sun beat down on her. The wind whispered through the trees, and the memory of Aylin's face fueled her every step. She was May, and she would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. She would be a force to be reckoned with. And Jedediah Stone would learn to regret the day he crossed her path. The debt wouldn't be paid in coin, but in blood. The wildflowers, once a fleeting comfort, now seemed to taunt her with their delicate beauty, a stark contrast to the ugliness that had consumed her life. May pushed onward, the deer trail a fickle guide through the thickening woods. The sun, a relentless eye in the sky, beat down on her, turning the air thick and heavy. She remembered Stone's words, his voice a venomous whisper that clung to her like the dust of Willow Creek. Debts must be paid, one way or another. The words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. She quickened her pace, driven by a primal urge to escape. She needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and Willow Creek, between herself and Jedediah Stone. She imagined him now, back in the saloon, surrounded by his cronies, plotting her demise. She could almost smell the stale beer, the acrid smoke, the stench of their malice. She had to be smarter than him. She had to anticipate his moves, to outwit him at every turn. She had to become a ghost, a whisper in the wind, impossible to catch. She reached a ridge, a rocky outcrop that offered a panoramic view of the surrounding landscape. She paused, catching her breath, her gaze sweeping across the endless expanse of hills and valleys. She felt a pang of longing, a deep ache in her heart. She had come to this land with such hope, with such dreams. She had envisioned a new life for herself, a life of peace and prosperity. But those dreams were shattered now, reduced to ashes by Stone's hatred. Her future, stolen from her by greed and prejudice. She thought of Lin, her brother, still waiting in China. She had promised him a better life, a life free from poverty and oppression. She had promised him that she would bring him to America, that they would build a new life together. But now she didn't know if she could keep that promise. She didn't know if she would even survive. The thought of him, of his unwearying faith in her, gave her a fresh surge of determination. She couldn't give up. She had to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for him. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of pursuit. Nothing, just the endless expanse of wilderness, stretching out before her like an uncharted sea. She knew that Stone wouldn't give up easily. He was a relentless hunter, driven by a single-minded obsession. He would track her down, no matter how far she ran. She needed to find a place to hide, a place where she could rest and regroup. She needed to find water, food. She needed to plan her next move. She noticed a cluster of rocks at the base of the ridge, a small alcove that offered some protection from the elements. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She made her way down to the rocks, her body aching with every step. She collapsed against the cool stone, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the pain, the fear, the memories. She focused on the sound of the wind, the rustle of the leaves, the chirping of the birds. She allowed herself a few moments of peace, a brief respite from the relentless pressure. Then she forced herself to open her eyes, to face the reality of her situation. She needed to assess her supplies. She had a small pouch of dried meat, a canteen of water, a knife, and a few coins hidden in the lining of her trousers. Not much to sustain her on a long journey. She needed to find a source of water, a place where she could replenish her canteen. She needed to find food, anything to stave off the hunger that gnawed at her stomach. She also needed to tend to her shoulder. The makeshift bandage was soaked with blood, and the wound was throbbing with pain. She needed to clean it, to prevent infection. She carefully unwrapped the bandage, wincing as the fabric pulled against her skin. The wound was angry and inflamed, a testament to Stone's cruelty. She poured some water from her canteen onto a clean piece of cloth and gently dabbed at the wound, gritting her teeth against the pain. She knew that she needed to find some herbs, some natural remedies to help it heal. She finished cleaning the wound and rebandaged it, as best she could, her fingers clumsy and awkward. She knew that it wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She leaned back against the rock, exhausted and defeated. She closed her eyes again, allowing herself to drift off into a fitful sleep. She dreamed of Willow Creek, of her shop, of Aylin. She saw their faces smiling and happy. She felt the warmth of the sun on her skin, the gentle breeze in her hair. But then, the dream turned into a nightmare. She saw the flames, the smoke, the faces of the mob, contorted with hate. She heard Aylin's screams, the sound of gunfire. She woke with a start, her heart pounding in her chest, her body drenched in sweat. The dream was so vivid, so real. She sat up, her gaze darting around the clearing. She was Simone, but she knew that she wasn't Foy. Stone was still out there, waiting to pounce. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. She had to focus on the future, on her survival. She gathered her meager belongings, preparing to move on. She knew that she couldn't stay here. She needed to find a safer place, a place where she could hide from Stone. She glanced back at the ridge, at the endless expanse of wilderness. She felt a sense of trepidation, a fear of the unknown. But she also felt a sense of determination, a resolve to survive, to avenge Aylin's death, to reclaim her stolen future. She turned her back on Willow Creek, on the ashes of her past, and started walking east, towards the rising sun. She was a ghost, a fugitive, a survivor. and she would not be defeated. Not by Jedediah Stone, not by anyone. The dust devils danced behind her, mocking her flight. But she would not look back. The sun, a molten hammer, beat down on May's back as she pressed eastward. The landscape, once a tapestry of green hills, had transformed into a monotonous expanse of scrub and rock. Her water was dwindling. Her shoulder throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, and the gnawing hunger in her belly was a constant companion. She walked for what felt like an eternity, her gaze fixed on the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization, any glimmer of hope. But there was nothing, just the endless, unforgiving wilderness. Then, in the distance, she saw it. A flicker of movement, a dark smudge against the bleached landscape. Hope surged through her, a fragile butterfly fluttering in her chest. As she drew closer, the smudge resolved itself into something more substantial. A broken-down wagon, its wheels askew, its canvas torn and flapping in the wind. A scene of utter desolation. May approached cautiously, her hand instinctively reaching for the knife hidden beneath her tunic. She scanned the surroundings, her senses on high alert. There was no sign of life, just the eerie silence of the deserted trail. She circled the wagon, her gaze taking in every detail. The wheels were splintered, the axles cracked. It looked like the wagon had been abandoned in haste, left to rot under the relentless sun. A sense of foreboding washed over her. What had happened here? Where were the people who had been traveling in this wagon? Had they been attacked? Had they succumbed to the harsh conditions? She noticed a faint trail leading away from the wagon, a barely discernible path through the scrub. She hesitated, torn between her desire to investigate and her need to conserve her strength. But curiosity and a desperate hope for answers won out. She followed the trail, her steps slow and deliberate. After a short distance, she came to a barbed wire fence. Its posts collapsed, its wires tangled and broken. The fence looked relatively new, a stark contrast to the ancient landscape. She recognized the signs. This was cattle country. Someone had tried to carve out a ranch here, to tame this wild and unforgiving land. But they had failed. The broken fence suggested a struggle, a desperate attempt to keep the cattle contained. Perhaps a stampede, or something worse. She stepped over the fallen wires, her heart pounding in her chest. She continued to follow the trail, her eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. Then she saw it. A small weathered marker, barely visible amidst the scrub. She approached cautiously, her hand trembling. It was a grave. A simple wooden cross, crudely carved with a name, Sarah. And a date, not long ago. May stared at the grave, her heart sinking. A young woman, buried in this desolate place, a victim of the West's harsh realities. She knelt beside the grave, her head bowed in silent respect. She didn't know Sarah, but she felt a connection to her, a shared understanding of the hardships and dangers of frontier life. She wondered about Sarah's family, about the people who had buried her here. Had they survived? Had they managed to escape this cursed place? She stood up, her gaze fixed on the broken wagon in the distance. She had to get out of here. This place was cursed, haunted by the ghosts of broken dreams and lost lives. But as she turned to leave, she noticed something. A small leather pouch, lying half buried in the dirt near the grave. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. She opened the pouch, her eyes widening in surprise. Inside were a few tools, a needle and thread, and a small roll of leather. Sewing supplies. Aylin would be so proud of her, sewing even into this harsh land, remembering her teachings. A glimmer of an idea sparked in her mind. She could use these tools to repair the wagon, to make it at least temporarily functional. It was a long shot, but it was worth a try. It was better than nothing. She returned to the wagon, her mind racing. She examined the broken wheels, assessing the damage. The wood was splintered, the axles cracked. It would be a difficult repair, but not impossible. She started to work, her fingers moving quickly and efficiently. She used the needle and thread to stitch the torn canvas, reinforcing the weakened areas. She used the leather to patch the cracked axles, binding them together as best she could. Her sewing skills, honed over years of practice in her small shop, proved surprisingly useful. She was able to improvise, to adapt her techniques to the unfamiliar materials. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on her with relentless intensity. Her shoulder throbbed, her hands were blistered, and her body ached with exhaustion. But she persevered, driven by a desperate hope that she could somehow salvage this situation. She worked tirelessly, her focus unwavering. Finally, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, she finished. The wagon was repaired, at least temporarily. The wheels were still wobbly, the axles still cracked, but it was functional. It could move. May stood back, admiring her handiwork. She felt a surge of pride, a sense of accomplishment. She had taken something broken, something useless, and she had given it a second chance. But her hope was short-lived. As she tried to move the wagon, the repaired wheels groaned and creaked. The axles strained under the weight. With a sickening crack, one of the wheels collapsed. The wagon lurched to a halt, its repaired axles snapping under the strain. May stared at the broken wagon, her heart sinking. All her hard work, all her hope, had been for nothing. She sank to her knees, her body trembling with exhaustion and despair. She was alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a broken wagon and no hope of rescue. She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. She had failed. She had tried her best, but it wasn't enough. Stone had won. She opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the setting sun. The sky was ablaze with color, a fiery spectacle of red and orange. Even in this desolate place, beauty could still be found. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the night ahead. She was tired, wounded, and alone, but she was not defeated. She would survive. She would find a way. She would not let Stone break her. She stood up, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sun had set, plunging the landscape into darkness. But in the distance, she saw a flicker of light. A campfire. Hope surged through her again, a fragile ember glowing in the darkness. She started walking towards the light, her steps slow but determined. Perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The flicker of light, a distant promise in the encroaching darkness, pulled May forward. Her legs ached, her shoulders screamed, but the thought of warmth, of human contact spurred her onward. The ground sloped downwards, leading her toward the sound of rushing water. A river. She reached the bank, the roar of the current almost deafening. The river was wide, the water a churning, muddy brown, reflecting the last slivers of the dawning sun. Crossing it would be treacherous even in daylight. She scanned the shoreline, searching for a shallow ford, a place where she might be able to wade across without being swept away. The light from the camphor, closer now, revealed only jagged rocks and swirling eddies. Then she saw him, a lone rider, silhouetted against the firelight. His horse a dark, imposing figure against the flickering flames. He was tall and lean, his posture suggesting a life spent in the saddle. A weathered cattle rancher, if she had to guess. He sat motionless, watching her, his face obscured by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat. He didn't speak, didn't move, he just watched. May hesitated. Was he friend or foe? Could she trust him? Or was he another Jedediah Stone, waiting to prey on her vulnerability? She had no choice. She couldn't cross the river alone, not in the dark. She needed help. She stepped out of the shadows, into the firelight. her hands held out in a gesture of peace. "Hello," she said, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "I need help." The rider remained silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her. He seemed to be teasing her up, assessing her situation. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, gravelly drawl. "What kind of help?" "I need to cross the river," May said. "I'm trying to get aced." He studied her for another long moment, his eyes narrowed. "You alone?" "Yes," May said. She knew that admitting her vulnerability could be dangerous, but she couldn't lie. "Not now." He dismounted, his movements fluid and economical. He led his horse to the riverbank, the animal snorting and pawing at the ground. "Name's Caleb," he said, extending a hand. His hand was calloused and rough, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "May," she replied, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, reassuring. "What's a little lady like you doing out here all alone?" Caleb asked, his eyes searching hers. May hesitated. How much should she tell him? How much could she trust him? I had to leave Willow Creek," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There was trouble." Caleb nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He didn't press her for details. He seemed to understand that some things were best left unsaid. "This river can be treacherous," he said, his gaze fixed on the swirling current, "especially after dark. You're lucky I found you." "I know," May said. "I'm grateful." Caleb led his horse into the water, testing the depth and the strength of the current. The horse hesitated, its nostrils flaring, but Caleb coaxed it forward with gentle words and a firm hand. "It's not too bad here," he said, turning back to May, "but you'll need to hold on tight. And don't let go of the rope." He tossed her the end of a rope that was tied to his saddle. May caught it, her fingers trembling. "Can you swim?" Caleb asked. "A little," May replied, not wanting to reveal her limited skills. "Good enough," Caleb said. "Just stay close to the horse. He'll guide you across." May took a deep breath, steeling herself for the ordeal. She stepped into the water, the cold current shocking her skin. The riverbed was uneven and slippery, the rocks sharp and unforgiving. She stumbled, almost losing her footing, but she gripped the rope tightly, her knuckles white. Caleb's horse remained steady, a solid anchor in the swirling water. The current tugged at her, pulling her downstream. The water rose higher and higher until it was up to her chest. She gasped, her breath catching in her throat. She struggled to keep up with the horse, her legs burning with exertion. The roar of the river filled her ears, drowning out everything else. She looked up at Caleb, his face a dark silhouette against the firelight. He seemed calm and confident, his gaze fixed on the opposite bank. She focused on him, on his steady presence, and she found the strength to keep going. She kept her eyes on the horse, trusting it to guide her through the treacherous current. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she felt the ground rising beneath her feet. She stumbled onto the riverbank, her body shaking with cold and exhaustion. Caleb dismounted and helped her out of the water, his hand steadying her. "You made it," he said, his voice laced with a hint of admiration. "I didn't think you'd be able to do it." May leaned against him, catching her breath, her body trembling uncontrollably. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Caleb smiled, a rare and fleeting expression that transformed his weathered face. "You're welcome," he said. "Now, let's get you warmed up by the fire." He led her to the campfire, where a pot of coffee was simmering over the flames. He offered her a cup, the warm liquid soothing her chilled body. "Where are you headed?" Caleb asked, after she had finished her coffee. "East," May said. "I'm trying to get to my brother." She didn't elaborate. She didn't want to reveal too much. Caleb nodded slowly, his eyes searching hers. He seemed to sense that she was hiding something. "East is a long way," he said. And it's not safe for a woman alone. I know, May said, but I have no choice. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then he spoke, his voice thoughtful. I'm heading to Dodge City tomorrow, he said. I could take you with me. It's not exactly east, but it's a start. May looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Was this a genuine offer of help? Or was it a trap? She studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. But she saw nothing but honesty and a quiet strength. She had to trust him. She had no other choice. I would be grateful, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Thank you, Caleb. Caleb nodded, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything more. He just stared into the flames, lost in his own thoughts. May sat beside him, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. She was safe, at least for now. She had found an ally, a protector, in this harsh and unforgiving land. But she knew that her journey was far from over. Jedediah Stone was still out there, waiting to catch her. And she had a feeling that Dodge City, with its saloons, its gambling halls, and its lawless inhabitants, would be a dangerous place for a woman on the run. But for now, she would focus on the present. She would enjoy the warmth of the fire, the taste of the coffee, and the company of this kind and enigmatic stranger. She would rest. She would gather her strength, and she would prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. She was May, and she would survive. She had to. For Aylin, for Lynn, and for herself. The dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, as Caleb stirred the embers of the fire. May, wrapped in a rough woolen blanket Caleb had offered, watched him, her eyes still carrying the shadows of the night. The river, now shimmering in the morning light, seemed less menacing, yet the memory of its icy grip lingered. Coffee's ready, Caleb said, his voice still gravelly but softened by the early hour. He poured her a cup, the aroma filling the air, a small comfort against the vastness of the landscape. Thank you, May said, accepting the cup. The warmth spread through her, chasing away the lingering chill. They ate in silence, sharing a breakfast of hardtack and jerky. Caleb didn't press her to talk, respecting her silence. He seemed content to let her be with, to simply offer her a moment of respite. After breakfast, Caleb saddled his horse. Ready to go? He asked, his eyes meeting hers. May nodded in, gathering her meager belongings. She climbed onto the back of Caleb's horse, clinging to him for support. The ride was rough, the terrain uneven, but Caleb was a skilled horseman, guiding the animal with a gentle hand. They rode for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The landscape stretching out before them in an endless panorama of scrub and rock. May, exhausted from the journey, drifted in and out of sleep, lulled by the rhythmic motion of the horse race. In the late afternoon, they reached Caleb's ranch. It was a small, isolated spread, nestled in a valley between two rugged hills. A weathered cabin, a dilapidated barn, and a small corral were the only signs of civilization in this vast and unforgiving land. Caleb helped May down from the horse, his hand steadying her. Welcome to my humble abode, he said, a hint of wry humor in his voice. May looked around, taking in the stark simplicity of the ranch. It was a far cry from the bustling streets of Willow Creek, but there was a certain beauty to its isolation, a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. Caleb led her into the cabin, a single-room structure with a dirt floor and rough-hewn walls. A fireplace dominated one end of the room, providing warmth and light. A small table and a few chairs were the only furnishings. It's not much, Caleb said, but it's home. May smiled. It's perfect, she said, meaning it. Caleb showed her to a cot in the corner of the room. You can rest here, he said. I'll start preparing supper. May lay down on the cot, her body aching with exhaustion. She closed her eyes, allowing herself to drift off into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she awoke, the cabin was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Caleb was tending to a pot of stew over the fire, the aroma filling the air, making her stomach rumble. "You're awake," Caleb said, turning to her with a smile. "Supper's almost ready." May sat up, stretching her stiff muscles. "Can I help?" she asked. "No need," Caleb said. "Just relax. You've been through a lot." They ate supper in silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the clinking of spoons against bowls. The stew was simple but hearty, filled with beans, vegetables, and a few chunks of tough beef. After supper, Caleb poured them each a cup of coffee. They sat by the fire, watching the flames dance and flicker. "This drought is killing us," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "The cattle are dying, the crops are failing. I don't know how much longer I can hold on." May listened, her heart aching for him. She knew what it was like to lose everything, to have your dreams shattered. "I'm sorry," she said. "I wish there was something I could do." Caleb shrugged. "It's the way of the West," he said. "Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You just have to keep fighting." He paused, staring into the flames. "My wife, Sarah. She died last year," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Caught a fever. There was nothing I could do." May reached out and touched his hand, her fingers gently squeezing his. "I'm so sorry," she said. Caleb looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. "She was a good woman," he said. "She loved this land. She believed in it." He was quiet for a long moment, lost in his memories. Then he spoke again, his voice stronger now. "She wouldn't want me to give up," he said. "She'd want me to keep fighting." May nodded, her heart filled with admiration for this strong, resilient man. She knew that she had a lot to learn from him. "What about you, May?" Caleb asked, turning to her. "What brings you to this part of the world?" May hesitated. How much should she tell him? How much could she trust him? "I told you. I had to leave Willow Creek," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There was trouble." Caleb nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. He didn't press her for details. He seemed to understand that some things were best left unsaid. "You running from something?" he asked, his voice low. May looked at him, her eyes filled with fear. "Yes," she said, I am." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. Then he spoke, his voice gentle. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said. "But if you ever need to talk, I'm here." May felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Caleb was a good man, a kind man. She knew that she could trust him. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you, Caleb." They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the chirping of crickets outside the cabin. May felt a sense of peace settle over her, a feeling that she hadn't felt in a long time. She was still running. She was still afraid. But she was no longer alone. She had found an ally, a friend, in this vast and unforgiving land. And that, she knew, was worth more than all the gold in the world. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment, the weight on May's heart felt a little lighter. The following day settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the relentless demands of the ranch. Caleb, true to his word, didn't pry into May's past. He simply treated her with a quiet respect, assigning her tasks that, while challenging, allowed her to contribute and find a sense of purpose. The drought had ravaged the land, leaving the fences weakened and broken. Cattle, desperate for water, pushed against the barriers, further exacerbating the damage. Caleb, stretched thin by the demands of the ranch, had fallen behind on repairs. May, surprisingly, found herself drawn to the work. Her delicate hands, once skilled at embroidering silk, adapted quickly to the rough feel of leather and wire. The same precision and patience she had applied to her sewing translated surprisingly well to mending fences. She learned to knot the wire tightly, to reinforce the leather patches with strong, even stitches, to hammer the posts firmly into the parched earth. Caleb watched her work, his eyes narrowed in appreciation. He hadn't expected a city girl to take to ranch work so readily. He'd seen plenty of greenhorns arrive in the West, full of grand ideas and lofty ambitions, only to be broken by the harsh realities of frontier life. But May, she was different. She was quiet, unassuming, but she possessed a quiet strength, a resilience that belied her delicate appearance. "You got a knack for that," Caleb said one afternoon, watching her expertly splice a broken wire. "Never seen a woman handle wire like that before." May smiled, a rare but genuine expression that lit up her face. "My grandmother taught me to sew," she said. "She always said that a good stitch could hold anything together." Caleb chuckled. Guess she was right. As the days passed, a quiet understanding grew between them. They worked side by side, sharing the burden of the ranch, their conversations scarce but meaningful. Caleb taught her about the land, about the cattle, about the rhythms of the seasons. May, in turn, shared stories of her life in China, of her family, of the traditions that had shaped her. They didn't talk about Jedediah Stone, or about the reasons why May had fled Willow Creek. Those were unspoken wounds, best left untouched. But in the shared labor, in the quiet companionship, a bond began to form, a fragile trust that blossomed in the desolate landscape. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Caleb noticed May studying a small worn book she had brought with her. He recognized the script immediately. "Chinese?" he asked, his brow furrowed. May nodded. "Poetry," she said. "My mother taught me to read it. It reminds me of home." Caleb, a man of few words and even fewer books, was intrigued. He had never met anyone who read poetry, let alone in Chinese. "Read some for me," he said, surprising himself with the request. May hesitated, her cheeks flushing slightly. She hadn't shared her poetry with anyone since leaving China. It was a private, cherished part of herself. But she looked at Caleb, at his honest eyes and his genuine curiosity, and she decided to trust him. She opened the book and began to read, her voice soft and melodic, the ancient words flowing from her lips like a gentle stream. She recited a poem about the moon, about the mountains, about the longing for home. Caleb listened intently, his gaze fixed on the flames. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the emotion, the longing, the sadness that resonated in May's voice. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low and respectful. "That was beautiful," he said. "Thank you for sharing that with me." May smiled, her heart warmed by his words. She felt a sense of connection to Caleb, a sense of understanding that transcended language and culture. As the days turned into weeks, May found a sense of peace she hadn't felt since leaving China. The hard work, the quiet companionship, the vastness of the landscape, it all soothed her soul, healing the wounds that Jedediah Stone had inflicted. She still thought about Aylin and Lynn, about the life she had left behind. But she also started to think about the future, about the possibility of building a new life, a new home in this strange and unforgiving land. One morning, as they were mending a fence near the river, May saw something glinting in the sunlight. She walked over to investigate and discovered a small toothed stone, its surface polished by the water. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. It was a beautiful stone, a reminder of the beauty that could be found even in the most desolate places. She looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with a newfound hope. "This land is hard," she said, "but it's also beautiful." Caleb smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "It is," he said, "It is, Desolate." He knew then that May was starting to heal, that she was starting to find her place in this world. And he knew that he, too, was starting to heal, that her presence had brought a light back into his life that he thought he had lost forever. The stone clutched tight in May's hand felt like a promise, a silent vow to face the future together. The tranquility of the ranch, so hard-won and fragile, shattered like glass with the dust cloud on the horizon. May, returning from tending the meager vegetable patch, shielded her eyes. Riders. Too many. They rode hard, their figures growing larger with each passing moment. A knot tightened in her stomach, a cold dread creeping up her spine. It was him. Caleb, alerted by the thundering hooves, emerged from the barn, his rifle in hand. He scanned the approaching figures, his face grim. He knew trouble when he saw it, and this was trouble writ large. "Get inside, May," he said, his voice low and urgent, "and stay down." May didn't argue. She knew the danger. She scrambled into the cabin, her heart pounding in her chest. She peered through a crack in the wall, watching as the riders approached. There he was, Jedediah Stone, unmistakable even at this distance. His cruel face, etched with malice, was framed by a greasy hat. He sat tall in the saddle, his eyes scanning the ranch, his gaze lingering on the cabin. A shiver ran down May's spine. He knew she was here. Jed and his men surrounded the cabin, their horses snorting and pawing at the ground. The air crackled with tension. Caleb stood his ground, his rifle held steady, his face a mask of determination. "Stone," Caleb called out, his voice ringing clear across the yard. "This is my property. You're trespassing." Jed Stone dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth. He sauntered towards Caleb, a sneer twisting his lips. "Caleb," he drawled, his voice dripping with false cordiality. "Always a pleasure. I'm just here looking for someone." "Looking for trouble is what you're doing," Caleb retorted, his grip tightening on his rifle. Now, Caleb," Jed said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "No need for that. I'm just looking for a little lady, a Chinese girl. Name's May." May gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He knew her name. He was toying with her. Caleb's face hardened. "There's no one here by that name," he said, his voice firm. Jed chuckled. A harsh, unpleasant sound. "Don't lie to me, Caleb. I know she's here. I saw her tracks. I aim to collect what's mine." "She ain't yours," Caleb said, his voice rising. "She's under my protection now." Jed's eyes narrowed, his smile vanishing. "You're making a mistake, Caleb," he said, his voice laced with menace. "This ain't your fight." "It is now," Caleb said, his rifle never wavering. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." Jed Stone hesitated, his gaze flicking between Caleb and the cabin. He knew Caleb was a formidable opponent, a skilled marksman, and a seasoned fighter. But Jed had the numbers, and he wasn't afraid to use them. "All right, Caleb," Jed said, his voice cold and hard. "Have it your way. Boys, take the cabin." His men surged forward, their rifles raised. Caleb fired, the shot echoing across the valley. One of Jed's men crumpled to the ground. The fight had begun. May watched in horror as the cabin was besieged. Bullets ripped through the walls, splintering the wood. She huddled on the floor, covering her ears, trying to block out the sounds of the gunfire. Caleb fought bravely, his shots finding their mark with deadly accuracy. But he was outnumbered, and the odds were stacked against him. Jed's men swarmed around the cabin, firing relentlessly. A bullet whizzed past May's head, narrowly missing her. She screamed, her nerves shattered. She had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait to die. She remembered the rifle Caleb had shown her how to use. It was leaning against the wall, loaded and ready. She grabbed it, her hands trembling. She had never fired a gun in her life, but she knew she had to try. She crept to the window, peering through the crack. She saw Jed Stone standing in the yard, watching the fight, a cruel scowl on his face. He was the one who had caused all this pain, all this suffering. He was the one who had destroyed her life. May raised the rifle, her hands shaking. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She closed one eye, aiming at Jedstone's chest. She pulled the trigger. The rifle recoiled, knocking her back. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space of the cabin. She saw Jedstone stagger, his hand flying to his chest. He looked at her, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Then he crumpled to the ground. A cheer erupted from Caleb, who had seen what she had done. He redoubled his efforts, his shots finding their mark with renewed vigor. Jed's men, demoralized by the loss of their leader, began to falter. The tide of the battle had turned. Caleb fought his way through the remaining attackers, his rifle blazing. He forced them back, pushing them away from the cabin. Finally, they broke and ran, fleeing into the darkness. The ranch was silent, save for the crackling of the fire and the groans of the wounded. Caleb stood in the yard, his chest heaving, his rifle still raised. He had won. He turned to the cabin, his eyes searching for May. He rushed inside, his face etched with concern. He found her huddled on the floor, her face pale, the rifle lying beside her. He knelt beside her, taking her in his arms. "May," he said, his voice filled with relief. "Are you all right?" May looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. I shot him," she said, her voice trembling. "I shot Jedstone." Caleb held her close, his hand stroking her hair. "You did what you had to do," he said. "You saved my life. You saved us both." He pulled back, looking into her eyes. "It's over, May," he said. "It's finally over." May clung to him, burying her face in his chest. She had survived. She had fought back. And she had finally found a place where she belonged. The weight on her heart, though still present, felt a little lighter. She was no longer just running. She was fighting for something. For herself. For Caleb. For a future she could barely imagine. The aftermath of the gunfight hung heavy in the air, thicker than the dust still settling on the parched earth. 2 of Jed's men lay dead, sprawled unceremoniously where they'd fallen. The others had scattered like quail, disappearing into the vastness of the plains. Caleb surveyed the scene, his face grim, his gaze lingering on Jed's lifeless form. The fight was over, but the trouble, he knew, was far from done. He helped May to her feet, his strong arms offering sod comfort. She was still trembling, her eyes weed with shock, but there was a newfound steel in her gaze. She had faced her demons, and though scarred, she hadn't broken. Then Jedstone stirred. A groan ripped from his throat as he weakly pushed himself up onto his elbows. The bullet, May realized with a jolt, hadn't killed him. It had only wounded him. A wave of nausea washed over her. It wasn't over. Not yet. Jedstone, his face contorted in pain and rage, glared at May. You little," he rasped, clutching at his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his shirt a crimson red. Caleb moved swiftly, positioning himself between May and Jed. He raised his shotgun, the twin barrels glinting in the fading light. "Stay back, Stone," he warned, his voice low and dangerous. "It's over. Just go." Jedstone spat on the ground, a fleck of blood marring the dry earth. "Over?" he croaked. "It's just beginning. You think you can get away with this, Caleb? You think you can protect this thief?" Caleb frowned. "Thief? What are you talking about?" Jedstone smirked, a cruel, triumphant expression that sent a shiver down May's spine. This wasn't just about revenge, she realized. This was something else entirely. "She stole from me, Caleb," Jedstone said, his voice regaining strength. "She stole my money, a considerable sum, and she made false statements to the sheriff. Slander it was. Ruined my reputation." May gasped, her eyes widening in disbelief. This was a lie, a blatant, outrageous lie. She had taken nothing from him. She had only tried to escape his clutches. "That's not true," she cried, her voice trembling with indignation. "I didn't steal anything." Jed Stone ignored her, focusing his gaze on Caleb. "She's a liar, Caleb, a cheat. She came here looking for refuge and you, like a fool, took her in. Now you're harboring a criminal." Caleb hesitated, his eyes flicking between May and Jed Stone. He had trusted May, had believed her story. But Jed's words planted a seed of doubt in his mind. He knew Stone was a snake, capable of anything. But could he be lying about this too? May saw the doubt in Caleb's eyes, and her heart sank. Had she misjudged him? Would he believe Stone's lies over her word? "Caleb, please," she pleaded, her voice filled with desperation. "He's lying. He's trying to trick you." Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Did you steal from him, May?" he asked, his voice low and serious. May met his gaze, her eyes filled with honesty. "No," she said firmly. "I swear I didn't take anything. He's just trying to get back at me." Caleb studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. He saw nothing but fear and desperation. He knew May. He knew her heart. He couldn't believe she was capable of such a thing. He turned back to Jed Stone, his face hardening. "I don't believe you, Stone," he said, his voice cold and unmurmuring. "Macy is under my protection. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the sheriff, but you're not touching her." Jed Stone sneered. "You're making a big mistake, Caleb," he said. "Protecting a criminal is a crime in itself. You'll regret this." He struggled to his feet, his face pale and drawn. He motioned to his remaining mates, who were hovering nervously in the distance. "Let's go," he said, his voice filled with venom. "We'll settle this another way." Jed Stone and his men mounted their horses and rode off into the night, leaving Caleb and May alone in the aftermath of the gunfight. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote. Caleb lowered his shotgun, his shoulders slumping with exhaustion. He turned to May, his eyes filled with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. May nodded, though she was far from all right. Jed Stone's accusations had shaken her to her core. She knew he wouldn't let this go. He would use every means at his disposal to destroy her. "He's not going to stop, is he?" she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He's going to keep coming after me." Caleb sighed. "I know," he said, "but I won't let him hurt you. I promise." He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "We'll figure something out," he said. "We'll find a way to prove your innocence. We just need to be smart about it." May looked at Caleb, her heart filled with gratitude. He had believed her, had stood by her, even in the face of Jed Stone's lies. She knew she could trust him with her life. But she also knew that Jed Stone was a powerful and dangerous man. He had the law on his side, and he wouldn't hesitate to use it against her. She was trapped, caught in a web of lies and deceit. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, May felt a sense of dread settle over her. The fight had just begun, and she knew it would be a long and difficult one. The accusations, though false, had changed everything. She wasn't just running from a vengeful muss anymore. She was running from the law. And that, she knew, was a much more formidable enemy. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the chilling premonition of what was to come. They were sorry, for now, but the shadow of Jedediah Stone loomed large, promising a storm on the horizon. The air thickened, heavy with unspoken words. Jedediah Stone's parting shot, yellow lover, hung in the air like a venomous fog, stinging more than any bullet. May flinched, the insult a familiar sting from a past she desperately tried to bury. Caleb's jaw tightened. The insult, the blatant prejudice, ignited a slow burn in his gut. It wasn't just about the money, or even about May herself. It was about control, about dominance, about a twisted sense of entitlement that festered in men like Stone. He released May's hand, his movements deliberate, his gaze fixed on the receding figures of Stone and his men. He spat on the ground, the gesture a mirror of Stone's earlier contempt. He wouldn't give Stone the satisfaction of a visible reaction, but the seed of anger had been planted. May watched him, her heart heavy. She had brought this trouble to his doorstep, exposed him to Stone's venom. I'm sorry, Caleb, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Caleb turned to her, his face softening. He saw the fear in her eyes, the vulnerability that she tried so hard to conceal. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender. Don't, he said, his voice low. Don't apologize for someone else's ugliness. It ain't your burden to carry. He looked back towards the departing riders, their silhouettes fading into the twilight. He'll be back, Caleb said, his voice grim. He ain't the kind to let things go. Especially not when his pride's been wounded. May shivered, despite the warmth of the fire. What are we going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. Caleb pondered for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. He knew they couldn't stay here. Stone would be back, and next time, he'd be better prepared. He'd bring the law, or a semblance of it, and he'd paint May as a criminal, a thief, a threat to decent society. They needed to disappear, to find a place where they could be free, at least for a few. We're leaving, he said, his voice firmed. Tonight, we'll pack what we can carry and head west. Maybe try to cross into Indian territory. It's a risk, but it's better than waiting here for Stone to come back and hang us both. May nodded, her face etched with determination. She was tired of running, tired of hiding. But she knew Caleb was right. They had no choice. What about the ranch? She asked, her voice laced with regret. Caleb sighed, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated buildings, the parched fields, the fences that they had worked so hard to mend. It's just land, he said, his voice tinged with sadness. Land can be bought and sold. Life is something else entirely. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. We'll come back someday, he said, when this is all over. We'll rebuild. But right now, we need to survive. They worked quickly, gathering what little they had. Caleb packed his rifle, his ammunition, and a few essential tools. May packed her poetry book, a small pouch of dried herbs, and the smooth river stone she had found near the river. She hesitated for a moment, looking around the cabin, her gaze lingering on the few personal items she had accumulated in the short time she had been there. A hand-stitched sampler she had found in a dusty corner, a small vase filled with wildflowers she had picked from the meadow. They were small things, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they represented a fragile sense of belonging, a hope for a future that now seemed uncertain. She decided to leave them behind. They were just things after all, and she couldn't afford to carry any unnecessary burdens. They saddled the horses, their movements quick and efficient. Caleb checked his rifle one last time, making sure it was loaded and ready. He knew they were riding into the unknown, into a wilderness fraught with danger. But he was determined to protect May, to keep her safe, no matter the cost. As they rode away from the ranch, May looked back one last time. The cabin stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, a lonely beacon in the vast and unforgiving landscape. She felt a pang of sadness, a sense of loss for the life she had briefly glimpsed, the life that had been so cruelly snatched away from her. But she also felt a sense of hope, a flicker of defiance in the face of adversity. She was not a victim. She was a survivor. And she would not let Jedediah Stone break her. They rode west into the darkness, their horses' hooves pounding a steady rhythm against the dry earth. The wind whipped through their hair, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of a new beginning. They were fugitives, outlaws running from a past that threatened to consume them. But they were also free. Free from the constraints of society, free to forge their own destiny in the wild and unmowed heart of the American West. As they rode, Caleb couldn't shake Stone's words. Yellow lover. It wasn't just a slur against May. It was a challenge to his own sense of self. He'd always considered himself a man of principle, a man who judged others by their actions, not their skin. But Stone's words forced him to confront a truth he'd long avoided. The prejudice that ran rampant through this land. The insidious poison that tainted even the best of men. He glanced at May, her face pale and drawn in the moonlight. He knew she had faced this kind of hatred before, had endured countless indignities simply because of her race. And yet, she had never allowed it to break her spirit. Her resilience, her quiet strength, filled him with admiration. He owed her more than just protection. He owed her his respect, his understanding, and his unwavering support. He would not let Stone's prejudice define him. He would stand by May, not just because she needed him, but because it was the right thing to do. As they rode into the darkness, Caleb made a silent vow. He would not let Stone's hate win. He would protect May, and he would fight for a world where such prejudice had no place. He didn't know how or when, but he knew that he had to try. For May and for himself. The vastness of the plains swallowed them whole. Two figures, silhouetted against the starlit sky, riding towards an uncertain future, bound together by a shared past and a desperate hope for a better tomorrow. The cold seeped into their bones as they rode, the silence broken only by the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of hooves. Caleb kept glancing at May, a question forming on his lips, but he held back. He'd seen a flicker of something in her eyes back at the ranch, something that hinted at a strength he hadn't suspected. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the full story just yet. They rode for what felt like hours, the moon a silent witness to their flight. Just as the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, Caleb pulled up, signaling May to stop. They were in a shallow ravine, offering some cover from prying eyes. "We need to rest the horses," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. "And get some sleep." May nodded, dismounting stiffly. She felt numb, her body aching, her mind still reeling from the events of the night. She helped Caleb unsaddle the horses, her movements mechanical. They didn't speak as they made a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their face. They shared a meager meal of dried beef and hardtack, the silence heavy between them. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the landscape, Caleb leaned back against a rock, closing his eyes. "Get some sleep, May," he murmured. "I'll keep watch." May hesitated, then nodded. She lay down near the fire, pulling her shawl around her. Sleep came quickly, a heavy, dreamless oblivion. She awoke with a start, her senses on high alert. A sound, a distant sound, had jolted her awake. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. Caleb was gone. Panic surged through her. Where was he? Had Stone found them already? She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the rifle Caleb had given her. She crept to the edge of the ravine, peering cautiously over the rim. And then she saw them. Jedediah Stone and his men. They were riding towards the ravine, their faces grim, their rifles raised. May gasped, her blood turning to ice. They had found them. It was over. But then she saw Caleb. He was standing in front of Stone and his men, his rifle held steady, his face a mask of defiance. He must have been tracking them. "Get out of here, Stone!" Caleb shouted, his voice ringing clear across the open space. "Leave her alone!" Stone laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound that sent a shiver down May's spine. "You think you can stop me, Caleb?" he sneered. You're just one man." "I'm all she needs," Caleb retorted, his voice unwavering. Stone's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Caleb," he said, his voice laced with menace. "This ain't your fight." "It is now," Caleb said, his rifle never wavering. "You want her, you'll have to go through me." For a moment, Stone hesitated. He knew Caleb was a formidable opponent, a skilled marksman, and a seasoned fighter. But he had the numbers, and he wasn't about to back down. "All right, Caleb," Stone said, his voice cold and hard. "Have it your way." He drew his revolver, the movement swift and deadly. Caleb reacted instantly, bringing his rifle to his shoulder and firing. The shot rang out, echoing across the ravine. Stone staggered, clutching at his chest. A crimson stain bloomed on his shirt. But Stone didn't fall. He readied his revolver, his face contorted in pain and rage. He fired. May watched in horror as the bullet struck Caleb, sending him staggering backward. He crumpled to the ground, his rifle falling from his grasp. "Caleb!" May screamed, her voice filled with anguish. Stone's men surged forward, their rifles raised, ready to finish what Stone had started. May knew she had to do something. She couldn't let them kill Caleb. She raised the rifle, her hands trembling. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. She closed one eye, aiming at Jedediah Stone's chest. She pulled the trigger. The rifle recoiled, knocking her back. The shot rang out, deafening in the confined space of the ravine. She saw Jedediah Stone freeze, his eyes widening in shock and disbelief. Then he crumpled to the ground, dead. Stone's men stopped, their faces etched with confusion and fear. They looked at Stone's lifeless body, then at May, their eyes filled with uncertainty. May stood her ground, her rifle still raised, her face pale but resolute. She had killed him. She had killed Jedediah Stone. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind whistling through the ravine. Then one of Stone's men turned and ran. The others followed, scrambling to mount their horses and fleeing into the distance. May lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. She had done it. She had saved Caleb. But at what cost? She ran to Caleb, dropping to her knees beside him. "Caleb," she cried, her voice filled with despair. "Caleb, please, wake up." She cradled his head in her lap, her tears falling on his face. He was still breathing, but his face was pale, his eyes closed. She didn't know what to do. She had no medical training, no way to help him. She was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with a wounded man and a dead body. She looked at Caleb's face, his features etched with pain. She knew she couldn't leave him here to die. She had to get him help. But how? She looked at the departing riders in the distance. She could have chased them. She could have gone after them. But she needed to get Caleb out of there. She made a decision. She would get him to the nearest town. She would find a doctor. She would save his life, even if it meant risking her own. The woman he thought he knew vanished, replaced by a steely resolve. The man he was shifted too, becoming something harder, more focused. The weight of the rifle in her hands seemed natural, not foreign. He knew, lying there, that May wasn't just a survivor. She was a warrior, and he, somehow, had become her cause. The dust swirled around May as she knelt beside Caleb, her tears mixing with the grime on his face. His breathing was shallow, ragged. He needed help, and he needed it now. But before that, there was another task, a grim necessity that weighed heavy on her soul. Jedediah Stone lay sprawled a few feet away, his eyes staring blankly at the ski. He couldn't be left like that, carrion for the vultures. She looked at Caleb, his face pale and drawn. He wouldn't approve, not of leaving a man unburied. It was a basic decency, a respect for the dead. even for a man like Stone. She spoke softly, hoping he could hear her. Caleb, I have to bury him. His eyelids fluttered, and he groaned softly. He didn't respond, but she knew somehow that he understood. She found a shovel amongst Caleb's gear, the metal cold and heavy in her hands. The ground was hard, unforgiving, but she dug with a frantic energy, her muscles burning, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She dug until the hole was deep enough to hold the darkness, deep enough to keep Stone from haunting them. Rolling him into the shallow grave was a task that tested her strength, her resolve. She averted her eyes, trying not to dwell on the man he had been, the evil he had wrought. He was just a body now, a shell emptied of its venom. The silence was broken only by the scrape of the shovel and the mournful cry of a hawk circling overhead. She filled the grave, packing the earth tight, erasing the evidence of her deed. She found a rough, unmarked stone and placed it at the head of the grave. It was a pitiful marker, but it was all she could offer. As she finished, Caleb stirred again, his eyes opening slightly. He looked at her, his gaze unfocused. May, he whispered, his voice weak. I'm here, Caleb, she said, her voice trembling. I'm here. He tried to sit up, but winced in pain. Stone, he murmured. Is he? She nodded, her throat tight with emotion. He's gone, Caleb. He can't hurt us anymore. A faint smile flickered across his lips. Good, he whispered. Good. She knew she couldn't linger. Stone's men could return, and they would be looking for revenge. They had to leave, to find a safe place to tend to Caleb's wounds. She cleaned the wound with water from his canteen. She then tore strips of cloth from her petticoat and bandaged his chest as best she could. The bullet was still lodged in him, she could tell. He needed a doctor. She helped him onto his horse, her muscles straining with the effort. He groaned with pain, but he held on, his grip surprisingly strong. She mounted her own horse, her face grim. They rode slowly, Caleb swaying in the saddle. She supported him as best she could, her arm wrapped around his waist. Every jolt, every bump in the road sent a fresh wave of pain through him. The sun beat down on them, relentless and unforgiving. The landscape stretched before them, vast and empty, offering no solace, no hope. She scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of civilization, any indication of help. As they rode, the weight of what she had done settled upon her, heavy and suffocating. She had killed a man. She had taken Cecil's life. It didn't matter that he had deserved it, that he had threatened her and Caleb. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. She glanced at Caleb, his face pale and drawn. He had saved her life, had stood between her and Stone's hatred, and she had repaid him by killing his enemy, by dragging him into a situation that could cost him everything. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She was a burden, a danger to him. He would have been better off without her. Caleb, she said, her voice barely audible. I'm sorry, I didn't mean for any of this to happen. He turned to her, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. Don't, he said, his voice weak but firm. Don't apologize. You did what you had to do. He reached out and took her hand, his grip surprisingly strong. We're in this together, May, he said. We'll get through this. Together. His words filled her with a sense of gratitude, a sense of hope. She wasn't alone. She had Caleb. And as long as they had each other, they could face whatever the future held. They rode on, their horses plodding slowly across the barren landscape. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. As darkness fell, they found a small cave, a shallow recess in a rocky hillside. It wasn't much, but it offered some protection from the elements. She helped Caleb dismount, easing him gently to the ground. He lay there, his eyes closed, his breathing shallow. She built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. She sat beside him, watching over him, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she would do everything in her power to protect Caleb, to keep him off of. The fire crackled and popped, the only sound in the vast and silent wilderness. Mai looked at Caleb, his face etched with pain, and a profound sense of responsibility settled upon her. She had taken a life, and now she had to fight to save one. She was no longer just a fugitive, a runaway. She was a protector, a guardian, and she would not fail so. The land was harsh, unforgiving, but she was tougher, more resilient. She would survive, and she would make sure that Caleb survived with her. The unmarked grave behind them was a constant reminder of the price of survival, the heavy burden they now carried. But it was also a testament to their strength, their courage, and their unwavering commitment to each other. They were bound together now, not just by circumstance, but by blood, by shared experience, by a love that had been forged in the fires of adversity. And that bond, she knew, was unbreakable. The fire had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows on the cave walls. Caleb's breathing was shallow, ragged. May watched him, her heart aching with a fear she dared not voice. The sun would rise soon, and with it, the certainty that Stone's men, or the law, would be on their trail. Staying meant death. For both of them. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at her, a file touching his lips. "You need to go," he rasped, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire. May shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm not leaving you," she whispered. He reached out, his hand finding hers. His grip was weak, but his gaze was firm. "You have to, May. It's the only way." He knew it as surely as he knew the sun would rise. He was a burden, a liability. With him, she wouldn't stand a chance. Alone, she might just make it. He coughed, a wrecking, painful sound. "They'll be back," he managed to say, "and they won't show no mercy." He closed his eyes, gathering his strength. When he spoke again, his voice was stronger, more resolute. "Take my horse," he said. "He's faster than yours, and take what supplies you can carry." May's tears flowed freely now, but she didn't argue. She knew he was right. Staying would be suicide. He gestured weakly toward a small pouch hidden beneath his saddle. "There's some money," he said. "Not much, but it'll help you get by." He paused, his breathing becoming more labored. "Head west," he continued, "towards the mountains. There's a trail, the old Fox trail. It's dangerous, but it'll take you far from here." He coughed again, a bloody froth staining his lips. May wiped it away with her shawl, her hands trembling. "Don't look back," he said, his voice a bare whisper. "Just keep going. Find a new life, May. A better life." He closed his eyes, exhausted. May sat beside him, holding his hand, her heart breaking. She didn't want to leave him, but she knew she had no choice. He was sacrificing himself for her, giving her a chance to escape. As the first rays of dawn crept into the cave, painting the walls with a soft golden light, Caleb stirred again. He looked at May, his eyes clear, focused. "One more thing," he said. He reached inside his shirt, pulling out a small tarnished silver locket. He pressed it into May's hand, closing her fingers around it. "My mother's," he said. "Keep it safe." The locket was warm, smooth against her skin. She opened it, revealing a teasy, faded photograph of a woman, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. It was a tangible link to Caleb's past, a piece of his heart. She looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. She knew this was goodbye. She leaned down and kissed him, her lips lingering on his. It was a silent farewell, a promise to remember him always. She stood up, her legs weak, her body numb. She gathered what supplies she could, her movements mechanical. She saddled Caleb's horse, her hands shaking. She looked back at him, lying in the cave, his face pale and peaceful in the morning light. She wanted to say something, to tell him how much he meant to her, but the words wouldn't come. She simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared past, their unspoken love. She mounted the horse, her heart heavy with grief. She turned him west towards the mountains, towards the uncertain future that awaited her. She didn't look back. She couldn't. As she rode away, she clutched the locket in her hand, its warmth a small comfort in the vast and empty wilderness. She knew she would never forget Caleb, his kindness, his courage, his sacrifice. She rode for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky. The landscape changed, becoming more rugged and more unforgiving. The plains gave way to rolling hills, then to steep, rocky slopes. She followed the Ute Trail, a narrow, winding path that snaked through the mountains. It was a difficult journey, but she persevered, driven by a fierce determination to survive, to honor Caleb's memory. As she rode, she thought about him, about their brief time together. She remembered his quiet strength, his gentle touch, his unwavering belief in her. She remembered the way he had looked at her, with a mixture of admiration and desire. She knew she would never love anyone the way she had loved Caleb. He was her protector, her friend, her soulmate. And now, he was gone. She wiped away a tear, her face set with determination. She would not let his death be in vain. She would live her life to the fullest, and she would always remember him. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the mountains, she found a small clearing, a sheltered spot where she could make camp for the night. She built a small fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on the trees. She ate a meager meal of dried beef and hardtack, her appetite dulled by grief. She sat by the fire, watching the flames, her thoughts swirling in her mind. She was alone in the middle of nowhere, with no one to rely on but herself. She was a fugitive, an outlaw, running from a past that threatened to consume her. But she was also free, free from the constraints of society, free to forge her own destiny. And she was determined to make the most of it. She reached into her pack and pulled out her poetry book. She opened it to a random page and began to read, her voice soft, soothing. The words were a comfort, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was still beauty in the world. As she read, she felt a sense of peace settle over her. She was not alone. She had Caleb's memory, his love, his spirit. And she had her own strength, her own resilience. She would survive. She would find a new life. And she would never forget the man who had given her that chance. She closed the book, her heart filled with a mixture of grief and hope. She lay down beside the fire, pulling her shawl around her. As she drifted off to sleep, she dreamt of Salih, of his smile, his touch, his voice. She dreamt of a future where they could be together, free from fear, free from prejudice, free from the shadows of the past. She knew it was just a dream, but it gave her the strength to face the challenges that lay ahead. She would not give up. She would not surrender. She would keep going until she found the peace and happiness that she deserved. And she would always carry Caleb's memory in her heart, a beacon of light in the darkness. Caleb watched her go, the rhythmic beat of hooves fading into the vastness of the plains. The rising sun painted the sky in hues of orange and gold, a stark contrast to the grayness that had settled in his soul. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he wouldn't see another sunrise. The bullet had done its work, tearing through flesh and bone, leaving him hollowed out and spent. He closed his eyes. The image of May's face burned into his mind. He saw her strength, her resilience, the flicker of hope that he had helped to ignite. He had given her a chance, a sliver of light in the darkness. He could ask for no more. The pain was relentless now, a constant throbbing that pulsed through his body. He coughed, a ragged, bloody sound that echoed in the silence of the cave. He knew his time was near. He thought of his father, a hard man who had taught him the ways of the West. He thought of his mother, whose gentle spirit had softened the edges of his father's harshness. He thought of the dreams he had once held, the life he had hoped to build. But those dreams were gone now, lost in the dust and the violence of the frontier. He had lived a hard life, a life filled with hardship and loss. But he had also known moments of joy, moments of connection, moments of grace. He opened his eyes, gazing up at the skies. The sun was higher now, its warmth a fleeting comfort on his skin. He closed his eyes again, surrendering to the darkness that was creeping in. The last thing he heard was the whisper of the wind, carrying the echoes of violence and the faint hope of redemption. The land remained, indifferent yet accepting, a silent witness to the endless cycle of hardship and small mercies. Even small kindnesses ripple outward in a harsh world. May rode west, the mountains looming in the distance. The sun beat down on her, relentless and unforgiving. Her body ached. Her muscles screamed in protest. But she pressed on, driven by a force she didn't fully understand. She clutched the silver locket in her hand, its warmth a reminder of Caleb's love, his sacrifice. She would not let him down. She would honor his memory by living her life to the fullest, by finding the peace and happiness that he had wanted for her. She rode for days, following the Ute Trail, a treacherous path that wound through the mountains. She encountered dangers along the way, steep cliffs, raging rivers, wild animals. But she faced them all with a quiet determination, her spirit unbroken. She learned to hunt, to fish, to find shelter in the wilderness. She learned to read the signs of the land, to anticipate the changing weather, to trust her instincts. She became a survivor, a warrior, a woman forged in the fires of adversity. As she rode, she thought about Caleb, about the lessons he had taught her. He had shown her how to shoot, how to ride, how to survive. But he had also shown her the importance of gentleness, of compassion, of hope. He had believed in her, even when she didn't believe in herself. He had seen something in her that she hadn't seen, a strength, a resilience, a capacity for life. She vowed to carry those qualities with her, to live her life in a way that would make him proud. She would be a force for good in the world, a beacon of light in the darkness. One evening, as she camped beside a clear mountain stream, she saw a small group of riders approaching. They were Native Americans, members of the Ute tribe. She tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for her rifle. She had heard stories about the Utes, stories of violence and hostility. She didn't know what to expect. The riders approached cautiously, their faces impassive. They stopped a short distance away, their eyes fixed on her. An old man, his face etched with wrinkles, dismounted from his horse. He walked towards her, his movements slow and deliberate. He stopped in front of her, his eyes meeting hers. He spoke in his native tongue, his voice low and melodic. May didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. He was offering her peace, offering her friendship. She lowered her rifle, her heart filled with relief. She smiled at the old man, a genuine, heartfelt smile. He smiled back, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He gestured towards his companions, inviting them to join him. The other riders dismounted, their faces softening. They approached May, their eyes filled with curiosity and respect. They shared a meal together, a simple fare of roasted rabbit and berries. They spoke in broken English and sign language, communicating their stories, their hopes, their dreams. May learned about the Ute way of life, their connection to the land, their respect for nature. She learned about their history, their struggles, their resilience. She discovered that they were not the savages she had been led to believe. They were people, just like her, with families, with traditions, with a deep sense of community. She spent several days with the Utes, learning from them, sharing her own experience. She found solace in their company, a sense of belonging that she had never known before. When it was time for her to leave, she felt a pang of sadness. She had grown to care for these people, to respect their way of life. The old man gave her a gift, a small, intricately woven basket. He told her that it was a symbol of friendship, a reminder that she was always welcome among the Utes. May accepted the gift with gratitude, her heart filled with emotion. She knew she would never forget her time with the Utes, the lessons she had learned, the friendships she had forged. She rode on, her spirit renewed, her faith in humanity restored. She knew that even in the darkest of times, there was still hope, still kindness, still love. She carried Caleb's memory with her, his spirit guiding her, his love protecting her. She was no longer just a fugitive, a runaway. She was a woman with a purpose, a woman with a destiny. She rode towards the setting sun, towards the uncertain future that awaited her. She was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that she was not alone. She had the strength of her ancestors, the love of her friends, and the unwavering belief in herself. The land stretched before her, vast and endless, a silent witness to her journey. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying the echoes of the past and the promise of the future. And May rode on, a small figure against the backdrop of the majestic west, her heart filled with hope, her spirit soaring free.